Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yevamot daf 19. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to do a little bit of review before we get started. So we had a case yesterday. The whole big debate is about Rabbi Shimon's opinion about Eshet Achiv Shelo Ba La'olam. This is a case where a husband died, and after he died, a child was born. The question is, when exactly was the child born? So Rabbi Shimon, the rabbis say that as long as Reuven was her husband and Reuven died, it doesn't matter. If Levi was born, this is the third brother, I'll put up on the screen the image from yesterday's daf. If Levi was born, okay, here's Reuven died, he was married to Tamar. It doesn't really matter what happened. I'm kind of showing you the last image here, but no matter what, actually, this is not the classic case, but it doesn't really matter. Here, let's pick here. This is it. So if Reuven dies and Levi is born later, according to the rabbis, he is forever forbidden to Yael. Doesn't matter what happens when Yael does yibum with Shimon, when Levi's born after, irrelevant. According to Rabbi Shimon, if Yael, and here was the debate, which case exactly is he arguing with? Is it only if Yael already did yibum with Shimon and then Levi was born, it would be okay? Because when Levi was born, Yael was married to Shimon already and kind of removed from Reuven. Or is it even in the case where Reuven died, then Levi was born, and then Yael did yibum with Shimon? Does he even agree in that case that Levi will end up being permitted to Yael? So that's the big debate here, and that's what we saw. Rabbi Yoshaya basically says that Rabbi Shimon disagrees about both and permits it in both cases. So then we had Rav Yosef, who came and brought a question. Let's just start reading from there. Matkifla Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef comes and says, what's the basis of this whole idea? It's basically the idea is that when Reuven dies, she's already removed from Reuven because she's kind of attached to Shimon. That's what we call zika. It's going to be this big issue about zika, right, which we've started already in the beginning of the chapter, which is zika kiknusa damya? Is it as if she's kind of married to Shimon already, and therefore it doesn't matter when Levi's born. Once Reuven dies, as long as Levi's born after Reuven's death, she's already connected to Shimon. And that would be what we would assume the logic is if we hold like Rabbi Yoshaya, that in all cases after Reuven's death, if Levi's born at any point, Levi's going to be permitted to her if she were to fall to yibum to him. So now Rav Yosef says, but wait, how could that possibly be? Because you think you're trying to say, Rabbi Yoshaya, that Rabbi Shimon holds zika all the way, but we have a case where he debates whether zika and ma'amal is actually considered or not. So because of that, if he's not even sure if zika with ma'amal, when you already do this, it was somewhat kiddushin type thing, and she's really dedicated to Shimon, and there's the zika because Reuven had died already, even then Rabbi Shimon debates whether zika is considered like marriage or not. So in that case, where there was ma'amar, he has a debate. Of course, it's not going to be obvious to him that that's the case. So what was the case there? Let's pull up again from yesterday. These are in yesterday's diagrams. So we have these three brothers who are married to three random women. Then Reuven dies. So we have Tamar, who is his wife, and Tamar does ma'amar with Shimon. Okay, now, if Shimon then dies after she did ma'amar, they're in this in-between because Tamar is on a rabbinic level married to Shimon, and therefore Shimon and Yael fall to yibum to Levi, right? But only one of them does it. But if on a Torah level, Tamar is still connected to Reuven, in which case both of them need to do yibum. So what we saw there was Rabbi Shimon, I'm skipping now to the end of that mishna. Rabbi Shimon says, and this actually isn't the picture shows just the rabbi's opinion. Rabbi Shimon says, he does yibum with one of them and chalitza with the other. So now, yibum. Now the big question is like this. Okay, and here comes the Gemara's question. So here's our case. Shimon's dead. Tamar and Yael both, right? According to Rabbi Shimon, one of them can do yibum and the other one does chalitza. Now, yibume travaihu lo. What's clear here is Levi can't do yibum with both Tamar and Yael. Why not? Again, this has nothing to do with Eshet Achiv Shelo Ba La'olam, the little kid. This is Levi was a grown up at the time he was alive when both of them died. The issue here is is the ma'amar considered, and is the zika to Shimon would make basically Tamar related to Shimon and not really Reuven anymore. And what do we say here? Yibum et chavayhu lo. You can't do yibum for both. Why not? Why can't Tamar and Yael do yibum? Say Tamar does yibum for Reuven and Yael does yibum because of Shimon. Because the dilma yesh zika, because maybe the ma'amal and the connection of Tamar to Shimon already makes Tamar and Shimon as if they're married. In which case, havalu shtei yevamot haba'ot mibayit achat. Well, then Tamar and Yael are coming from the same husband. And we don't do that. You don't do yibum to both. We've learned that already before, right? That's basic laws of yibum. Only one wife does yibum. And in fact, Rashi quotes it because Rahmana Amal, the first Rashi on the page here, et beit achiv. He's building the house of his brother, house in singular, which means he doesn't build two families. So it's just one wife. So therefore, since there's a concern that maybe there's zika to Shimon and Tamar is connected to Shimon, they can't both do yibum because it'll basically mean two yibums for one brother. What about yibum echad v'iftar idach lo? Why don't you just say, well, if they're both connected to Shimon, then we should basically say one of them does yibum and the other one is fine, doesn't need to do anything. But didilma ein zika kiknusa. But maybe not, because maybe, right, if you're idach lo, this is not an option because maybe ein zika kiknusa. This is exactly what Rabbi Shimon's saying. I see two sides. Maybe zika is, in which case they can't both do yibum. Maybe zika is not a thing, in which case they both need to do yibum, which means it's not enough for one to do it and the other to be exempt. But we can't both do yibum because of the other issues. So what do? We have one do yibum and the other does chalitza. And if you say, right, I just didn't finish this line, but if you say ein zika, it's not kiknusa. Zika doesn't make you as if you're married. Havaluhu shtei yevamot haba'ot mishnei batim. And then there are two coming from two different ones, and then they both need to do yibum. So therefore, alma masapkale, okay? And therefore he's in doubt. So what do you see here? We see that Rabbi Shimon is in doubt about whether zika is like you're married or not. So because of that, we basically say it can't be that Rabbi Shimon holds yesh zika across the board, which means as soon as Reuven dies, anytime after that when Levi is born, the wife is Reuven's widow is going to be permitted, right? Assuming she does yibum with Shimon and Shimon dies, she'll be able to marry Levi because he was basically, as soon as Reuven died, Reuven's kind of out of the picture. That's what Rabbi Yoshai says. So this proves that no, he's not out of the picture because you don't say, or we don't know if zika is kiknus. So now they're going to suggest a possible explanation. V'chi tema, if you want to say, which is usually introduced and then going to be rejected, on a Torah level, really, you could do yibum to one and the other one will be exempt. Really, on a doraita level, yesh zika. She's as if she's married to Shimon. And really, it's enough to just do one. However, Rabbanit Michelle Farber, but the rabbis forbade this. Why did they forbid it? Gzera mishum shema yomru shtei yevamot haba'ot mishnei batim. Chad miyavma v'idach miftara bevelo klum. We're worried about what it's going to look like. In the end, it looks from the outside like there were two women coming from two different husbands. One was connected to Reuven, one was connected to Shimon, and right, we never had the fulfillment of the yibum of Reuven to Shimon. So people are going to look and say, hey, look, there were two wives here for two different husbands, and in the end, only one yibum was done. Maybe you would think if Reuven and Shimon die and they're married to random women, right? One's married to one and one's married to the other, forget yibum. Let's say they both die and they both they die at the same moment and both wives fall to yibum to Levi. They both have to do yibum, right? Unless they're erva on each other, which we saw. But assuming they're not erva to each other, they're not forbidden. Both wives have to do yibum. And that's because you have to, right? The whole reason is to lahakim shem hamet. Each brother needs their house to be fulfilled. So Levi will have to do yibum for both. But maybe people will think, oh no, Levi only does one yibum, right? You don't put two yibums on one person. And maybe it's enough just to do it in general for the sake of a brother. And that will basically permit the other wife to go get married. That's for sure not true. So this case, because it's like an in-between and it looks a little like it's from two different people, even though if you hold zika, it would be really only from Shimon, but people maybe don't know all that. So it's more what it's going to look like and will cause people to think that in a case where it's clear that the two wives come from different husbands and each one is obligated in yibum separately, they'd be both obligated for yibum. So we don't want you to think that only one can do it and exempt the other, and therefore you can't say that that's the situation. Okay, so I'm sorry. That's to say, maybe that's why they both need, one does yibum and the other does chalitza. So that would be a possible explanation. But but it can't be, because it's clear. It's not just exera, we're worried what people are going to think, and really need to, right, you only have to do one, because really zika is kiknusa, it's as if you're married, which is what we were trying to prove to support Rabbi Yoshaya's reading, because he holds zika all the way for Rabbi Shimon. But when you know that Rabbi Shimon's real issue is ma'amal v'lav ma'amal. It's all about which it's really what it really means here is ma'amal, like a real kinyan. Does it really make you as if you're really married or not? And likewise, zika would go with that, okay? And it's clear here that Rabbi Shimon doesn't really know. How do we know that? Is it just a theory? No, because it actually says it. Titanya, as it says in the following braita. Amar lahem Rabbi Shimon l'chachamim. Im ma'amaro shel sheni ma'amar, eshet sheni hu bo'el. If the ma'amar of the second one, meaning the ma'amar she did with Shimon, in the previous case that we just discussed, is ma'amar, then eshet sheni hu bo'el. Okay, then basically he is, one second. Ma'amar. Second, sorry, give me 1 second. Right. Okay. Now what we're talking about here is, if we view ma'amar as ma'amal, then Levi, when Shimon dies, remember, Reuven and Shimon both died. So if we consider her ma'amar as a real kinyan, as if she was actually married and she did yibum with Shimon, then when Levi does yibum with her, he's basically marrying the wife of the second brother, right? That's Eshet Sheni, right? Hu bo'el. He has relations with the wife of Shimon. But on the other hand, he says, right, this is what he's basically saying. 1 second. Right. So now he says, and if the ma'amar doesn't count, like this is Rabbi Shimon explaining exactly his problem. His problem is we don't know if the ma'amar is valid or not. If the ma'amar is really something, then she's basically Shimon's wife. And if the ma'amar is not something, then she's basically Reuven's wife. And that's why we have this quandary. And he, in the end, says, right, we're going to basically make one do yibum and one do chalitza, because we're really not sure what the status is. So now you see here from his wording that it's clear his issue was, does ma'amar count or does ma'amar not count? Okay, that's the issue. So in which case, we can't say that zika is kiknusa damya, according to Rabbi Shimon, which is exactly what Rabbi Yoshia said, Rabbi Yoshaya. But now comes Abai and he tries to answer Rabbi Yosef's question on Rabbi Yoshaya. Amar le Abai. All of a sudden raises this issue that maybe there's a difference between a zika when there's one brother to do yibum with and when there's two potential brothers to do yibum with. Well, what would the difference be? Because if the whole issue is how serious is zika, zika is going to obviously be more serious, or at least you would think, if there's only one brother. Then our connection to Shmuel is quite clear. He's the only one it's the only show in town, right? There's only one person to marry. But there's two brothers, then maybe she's not as connected to Shimon because there's another potential brother, Levi. So maybe there's a distinction between those cases. So now let's read it inside. Dilma ki amar Rabbi Shimon zika kiknusa damya. When he said it is, which was, let's assume Rabbi Yoshaya's reading of our Mishnah, that was biyabam echad, when there was only one yabam. But the case that we brought with the three brothers, there were three brothers, right? And that's why zika and the ma'amar weren't as serious, because she still could have married a different brother. right? Aval b'shnei yivamim lo, right? But he wouldn't necessarily say the same thing if there were two potential yivamim. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, that's not going to work because umishane leile Rabbi Shimon, can you really say that that would be a difference of Rabbi Shimon? Okay, now I'm going to bring up today's presentation. And now we're going to see, okay, we're actually not there yet. Sorry, my mistake. Okay, Vahatanya, we're not there with the presentation yet. We'll get there soon. So now they say, does Rabbi Shimon really say that? You think he really distinguishes between one Yavam and two Yavamim when it comes to Zika? And his whole debate, is Ma'amar serious or not? And is Zika serious or not is all a matter of when there's two potential brothers, and that's why we think, but if there's only one, it would really be. But can't work because Hatanya, Klal Amal Rabbi Shimon, says that Rabbi Shimon made this general rule. General rule, we're going to eventually, at the end of this answer, we're going to basically say general means in all cases. Okay, but first we're going to suggest maybe it's all cases, then we're going to say maybe not. We're going to have a little back and forth. But right now they're bringing it, thinking it means all cases, which means it's going to be clear. He holds it whether there's one Yabam or two Yavamim or more. Klal Amar Rabbi Shimon. Here's his rule. Kol shehaleida kodemet linisuin. This is about Eshet Achiv Shelo Ba La'olam, when you have a brother that's born after Reuven dies. If the birth happened before the marriage meaning the yibum. If the birth happens before she does yibum with Shimon, lo choletzet v'lo mityabemet. Then, right, if it's born before the yibum, she's still kind of connected to Reuven, in which case she doesn't do chalitza or yibum with Levi because Levi will forever be forbidden. Nisuin kodim laleida, but if she marries Levi first, she marries Shimon first, and then Levi's born, right? She does the yibum. Then the third brother's born. O choletzet o mityabemet. Then she could do yibum or chalitza. Now, my lav biyabam achat. Now, is this not where there's only one yabam? V'katane, and what does it say? Lo choletzet v'lo mityabemet. Now, what does it mean? Why lo choletzet v'lo mityabemet? Because she's still connected to Reuven. Now, if you hold zika with one yabam is really serious, then she should really be connected to Shimon as soon as, right, this is Rabbi Yoshaya, what he says, right? As soon as Reuven dies, she's connected to Shimon. And this doesn't hold that way because this exempts her because she's still really Reuven's wife, even though he's dead. So now they say, look, b'shnei yivamim. You could say that this case is only saying it if there were, when he said it all depends on, was the marriage before the birth, or was the birth before the yibum, right? Was the yibum before the birth or the birth before the yibum? That would be when there's multiple yivamim, because then we can't say a very strong zika because we don't know which brother she's going to end up marrying. But aval b'yabam echad, my wait. So then let's continue that conversation. Let's continue that equation. If that's the case, and the Gemara is going to now question, you're assuming right now, and this is to answer Rabbi Yoshaya, that if there was one yabam, only one brother, there was only Shimon. And when Reuven dies, there's just Shimon, which means her zika is very strong to Shimon, which means she's as if she's married, which means if Levi's born, even before she does yibum with Shimon, she's still going to be allowed to marry Levi down the road when Shimon dies. Now, if you're going to say that, which is what Rabbi Yoshaya says, then b'yabam echad hachanami o choletzet o mityabemet, so then you're going to say she does chalitza or yibum? Well, if that's the case, when it says that the marriage comes before the birth, or then either you do chalitza or yibum, they should have added to it, or right? That's, you're going to be if nisuin come before the leida, if there's two yavamim. But biyabam achad o choletzet o mityabemet. But if there's one yabam, then you're going to do choletzet o mityabemet. In other words, again, when there's two yavamim and the birth was before the yibum, then it doesn't work. Zika is not strong enough. You're still connected to Reuven. You can't marry the brother. But if there's only one yabam, it should be o choletzet o mityabemet. In other words, if the mishna, if the braita there is already splitting, which case is choletzet, which case is not, then when it gives an option of o choletzet o mityabemet, it should have given this option as well and said if there's only one yabam, then you could also do chalitza with Levi. Again, this means if there's only Shimon and then Levi's born before you actually did yibum, you're as if you're married to Shimon already, so therefore the law would be the same. as we already said before, which is where Rabbi Shimon was clearly said, if when you're married to Shimon, Levi is born, of course you're permitted to Levi. So the fact that they didn't specify that seems to be that it's not just that you can't distinguish between one Yabam and two Yevamim, which then brings us back to say we have a problem with Rabbi Yoshaya thinking that Rabbi Shimon holds zika across the board. So now they say, wait, Hula b'shnei Yevamim kamari. You could say the reason why the Mishnah didn't specify one Yabam versus two Yevamim is because the braita was only talking about two Yevamim. They weren't even relating to a case for this one Yabam. That was in their head. They were only focusing on a case of two, and that's why they didn't specify. They meant if there's two, and then if there's two, it's going to all depend. Since the zika is not so strong, it all depends on when the child was born. To which they answer, but then you could conclude that if there was only one, the zika would be strong enough, and she would actually, even Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon would specifically disagree with the rabbis then, and basically that would be Rabbi Yoshaya, that they disagree in all the cases of the Mishnayot. Okay, they disagree with the rabbis. So now they say, no, we're going to reject this because Elamai Kalala says the general rule of Rabbi Shimon. You can't say the general rule of Rabbi Shimon and say, but it's only in a case where there's two Yevamim. No, he holds this as a general rule across the board, which basically means that, what did he say there? We've proven a few things. It all depends on the order, which means he disagrees with the rabbis only about one case, only if the Levi is born after she's already married to Shimon. But if Levi is born before, then no. And that would be even if there's one Yabam only, it doesn't make a difference. And also we saw that he had his whole reason why he's doubtful about these cases is because he's not sure whether zika is strong enough or whether ma'amar is strong enough or not. So we basically disproven Rabbi Yoshaya. If you remember, when we made reference to this a number of dapim ago, we brought in Rav Safra, and then we talked about this case, and then we said, well, maybe you could explain like Rabbi Yoshaya, because remember his siman, mate nolad yibum, right? He dies, then the child's born, and then you do yibum. That's the case, right? So that's exactly what we just said, that even there, Rabbi Shimon agrees with the rabbis. And then there we brought up, but Rabbi Yoshaya disagrees with that. And then we said, oh, we already knocked out Rabbi Yoshaya, so it doesn't really matter. And this is where we knocked out Rabbi Yoshaya. Now we have another question. And interestingly enough, this question comes from Rav Oshaya, who's not the same person as Rabbi Oshaya. Od mativ Rav Oshaya. Rav Oshaya now questions and brings up the following case. And for this, we're going to use our presentation. Okay, so here goes. Okay, remind you again that if you're listening through the podcast, you can easily access these either in the details of the podcast or from the Hadran post from today on Yevamot 19 on our website. There's both. It's embedded in the Daf post, and also so you can just view it straight from Canva as a presentation, or you can open it as PDF and view it from there. So now we have our case. Shlosha achim, shnayim mehem nisuin shtei achayot. Okay, brings this Tanaitic source. We have 3 brothers and 2 sisters. Okay, so the 2 of the brothers are married to 2 of the sisters, or we're going to have other cases. Okay, we don't have a chart about this, but isha ubita. The main point is that where there's 3 brothers, 2 of them are married to 2 women that you can't be married to at the same time. So whether it's 2 sisters, or isha ubita, a woman and her daughter, or bat bita, or a woman and her granddaughter, isha bat bina, or a woman and her granddaughter from her son, or her granddaughter from her daughter, either which one. So those are all possible cases where these 2 brothers are married to 2 women who they both can't be married to at the same time. It doesn't matter because they're 2 brothers and they're married to them separately. That's totally fine. Now, what if both of them die? Okay, now when we've talked about this case in the past, we seem to indicate always that they die at the same time. The premise of our sugya in the beginning is going to be that they don't necessarily die at the same time. So now what happens? If Reuven and Shimon die, the halacha is hare'elu chotzot v'lo mityabmo. Both Yael and Chana in our story, who were married to Reuven and Shimon respectively, they both now fall to yibum to Levi. Now Levi can't marry 2 sisters, so because of that, they basically, this is what you call a chotzekukato. He's got zika to both, and a woman and her sister. He can't marry either one of them. So what do? They each do chalitza. Okay, chotzot v'lo mityabmo. Now comes the important part. Rabbi Shimon potel. Rabbi Shimon exempts. What does exempt mean? He prohibits them from marrying Levi. He says, forget about chalitza to get out of it. No. These women, this is erva. They basically fall to someone who can't marry both. It's an erva case. They're both exempt. They can go marry whoever they want without having to do anything. Now, what's the connection here? And remember what we said. We assume right now that Reuven died first. So now let's follow. If you want to say, Kasava Rabbi Shimon, zika kiknusa damya, that Rabbi Shimon holds that zika is as if they're married. So Yael, as soon as Reuven dies, Yael is, so to speak, connected with Reuven, with Levi. Okay, her new potential yibum. Now, she can't be connected to Shimon because Shimon's married to her sister. So she's connected to Levi. So now the obvious solution, even if Shimon were to die right after that, Yael and Levi should do yibum. Liyadme lekamaita. He should do yibum with the first wife. Viti pater idach. And then Chana will be exempt because Levi's married to her sister and he can't marry two sisters. That would be the obvious answer. So what do you see here? He obviously doesn't hold that zika is kiknusa damya, because if he did, then Levi would have married Yael and Chana Shimon's wife would have been prohibited. So that's what the Gemara says. But now comes Rav Amram, and he says, what are you talking about? My potel nami, when you misunderstood Rabbi Shimon. I'm going to explain Rabbi Shimon that really he meant Yael does yibum with Levi. Yes. When he said Rabbi Shimon poter, what did he mean? My potel nami potel bashniya. Poter means he exempts the second one. The second one doesn't do yibum, but the first one does. The second one can go marry whoever she wants, but the first one does yibum. So now, and again, Rav Oshaya brought a question on Rabbi Oshaya, trying to say clearly he doesn't know zika, because otherwise he would have said, Yael should do yibum with Levi, because Reuven died first. And then Chana is prohibited, and that poter is only the second one. Well, there's a bit of a problem with that answer. Tanya, it says in a braita, Rabbi Shimon poter b'shtehen. It says in a braita that Rabbi Shimon exempts both of them. So it's pretty clear that they're both exempt, which again goes back to our question. There obviously must not be zika, because otherwise Yael could do yibum. So here comes a creative explanation of the shtehen. Rava explains we're talking about a bit of a different case. When Rabbi Yossi poter b'shtehen, if you remember, we brought up this case where there were four potential arayot. There was a mother and her daughter. There were two sisters. There was a mother and her granddaughter, right, from her son, and a mother and a granddaughter from her daughter. So now Rava says when he says shtehen, he means 2 out of 4. He means that there were 4 wives. So let's take 2 cases that we had from that braita. We had 2 sisters, Chana and Yael. We had a mother and a daughter pair, Devorah and Miriam. And Shimon and Reuven each married one from each pair. Okay, so you have Reuven married Yael and Devorah, right? The mom from one case and the sister from the other. And Shimon married Chana and Miriam, the daughter and the other sister. Now, when Reuven and Shimon die, what happens? Again, assuming Reuven died first. So Yael does yibum with Levi, right? And Devorah can do yibum. And Miriam could do yibum with Shimon. Okay, let's see. I did it the reverse. Okay. So here, Devorah does yibum with Levi. In other words, the mom she's married to Reuven. So the mom of the mother-daughter pair is married to Reuven and does it with Levi. And one of Shimon's wives, who's now one of the sisters, Chana, does yibum with Levi. And then what does it mean, shtehen? It means the second from that pair and the second from that pair, okay, which doesn't really mean second. It means one from each pair, but 2 out of these 4 wives are basically exempted, right? They don't have to do yibum. So that's his explanation for why Rav Oshaya, right? So now we're left with, according to Rava, we really don't have a question on Rabbi Oshaya, because that's not a case. The whole question was, if Rabbi Shimon really holds zika, then what should happen? The first one should do yibum and the second should be exempt. So now Rava found a way to say that when Rabbi Shimon poter b'shtehen, he doesn't mean 2, the both wives, 1 of each one. He means 2 out of 4 wives. 2 of them do yibum, the first from each pair, and the other ones are exempt. Well, is that a good explanation, what Rava says? The Gemara is not going to like it so much. So they now say, Katai Rava ba'arba zuge. He got a little mixed up with this braita. Chada de o katane. First of all, it says this one or that one or that one or that one. They weren't giving a case where he was married to all of those women. And ve'od, Rabbi Shimon poter ba'arba atan mebaile. Even if he is going to read it as this one and that one and that one and that one, he shouldn't have brought a case with 2. He should have brought a case with 4 because there were 4 cases in that braita. So we throw out Rava's explanation, or at least we don't like it so much. But they're going to say, ve'od Tanya, and furthermore, by the way, we're going to see, Rabbi Shimon poter b'shtehen min hachalitza u'min yibum. Why does he exempt them both? Shene'emar isha lachota lo tikach litzro. בשעה שנעצו צרות זו לזו, לא יהיה לך ליקוחין אפילו באחד מהם. This is a further proof that Rava is wrong, and that really he exempts both sisters, and not one sister does yibum and the other one doesn't, because it says, what do we learn from Isha lachota lo tikach litzro? If they become tzarot zo lazo, in a situation where they're supposed to end up as the second wife to each other, there's lo likuchin ela afilu be'echad mehem. Then you don't marry either one of them, okay? That's Levi, who's in a situation where 2 sisters fault him. He can't marry any one of them, in which case it seems clear that he can't marry any one of them, which again precludes our explanation that yibum should have been permitted, right? Again, that, that zika is not kiknusa, because if zika was kiknusa, that the zika was as if she was married, the first one would actually do yibum when Reuven died, before Shimon died, right? Even if it's a matter of a few minutes, Reuven died first, still he died first. So there would be zika. She would be connected to Levi before the other wife got connected to Levi, and she would do yibum. Rabbi Shimon clearly holds, no, there's no zika, which means that at any point in time, if both wives fall to Levi, even if one fell before, but he never did yibum with her, if the other one now comes to do yibum with him, he's now got stuck in a situation where he has 2 wives who he can't marry them at the same time, in which case he doesn't marry any of them, and they're both exempt. So that's Rabbi Shimon, which proves this is wrong. But Ella Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, wait a minute, it really depends on the scenario. You're right, actually. If they fell one after the other, there would have been zika, and that would have been the case. But I'm still going to explain to you the source about Rabbi Shimon. So now, until now, we've assumed one fell first and then the other, right? Reuven died, then Shimon. So Reuven's wife should have been zika connected to Levi. But if we're talking about a case of a tragic accident where both of them die at the exact same moment, right? Even in a tragic accident, they won't necessarily die at the exact same moment. But if they were to die at the exact same moment, then even Rabbi Shimon, and that's even if Rabbi Shimon holds, like Rabbi Yoshaya thinks, and that zika is kiknusa, and the first one really should have done yibum. But this case, the first one doesn't do yibum because there is no first one, because they both died at the exact same moment. And that way, he was from the get-go in a situation where he had to marry 2 women, this Levi brother. So therefore, now, Rabbi Shimon, you'd have to say, Savalak Rabbi Yossi Aglili, this whole approach about whether you can exactly time things, whether it's possible that 2 brothers die at the exact same moment. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili says you can be exacting, and they could actually die at the exact same moment. So you'd have to assume that we can hold Charlotte Samson, and that then there would be a difference between if one died before the other or one died, they both died at the same time. And in which case we could potentially explain Rabbi Yoshaya, even in light of Rav Oshaya's question. But we still knocked him out from Rav Yosef's source, so therefore he's kind of rejected anyway. Now comes our alternative explanation. Rav Papa Amar, B'yibem v'achar kach nolad plig Rabbi Shimon. B'nolad v'achar kach yibem lo plig. He says exactly what we've been assuming from the beginning before we saw Rabbi Yoshaya, and after we saw the question of Rabbi Yoshaya, which is no. It all depends on the order. And this is what we saw Rav Safra said earlier in our Masechet, which is, if he did yibum, then Levi was born, then Rabbi Shimon's going to exempt. But if the child was born before yibum was performed, she's still kind of connected to Reuven, and he's going to be forever considered, or she'll be considered to him, Eshet Achiv Shelo Ba'al Olam, right? The wife of my brother, who we were never in the same world at the same time together. Utravayu lerabanan itzrich. Okay, now we're left to explain the question that we asked yesterday, which is, why do we need to bring both mishnayot then? Okay, so now we're going to explain both parts of the Mishnah were actually necessary for the following. Okay, this is answering a question we had in yesterday's daf, which is, here's the answer. It's a below zo af zo katani. It brought both cases separately to show you that according to the rabbis, in other words, again, according to Rabbi Shimon, if you had the second case, you wouldn't really need the first case, because it's obvious that if the second case is going to, if you're Rav Papa, then you're going to hold that if this, right, how would you say this? 1 second. Right. Okay. The basic point here is that the order, the way the Mishnayot go is the structure of a zlo zo af zo katani, which is you didn't really need the first case according to the rabbis because the first case is pretty obvious. Okay. But it's saying we're going to kind of not only an easy case to point out, but even a more complicated case. And that's what the way the Mishnah works. It's basically saying, even though in case number one, where she was still connected to Reuven when the son was born, of course it's going to be forbidden. But then they get to the other case, which is a bigger chidush, which is even if she's married to Shimon, she's still going to be forbidden. And that's how we read the order of the Mishnayot. And this is to answer the question that we had in yesterday's page. Okay, now Tanya Kavatei Rav Papa. We're now going to have a braita to prove Rav Papa. So how does this go? This is a long braita. What we're going to do is we're going to read the braita. We're going to then take a line that was not attributed to anyone, claim that this line is attributed to Rav Papa. To Rabbi Shimon, and then prove from there that Rabbi Shimon clearly only argues about the second case and not the first. So and then we're going to deal with some other things in the braita that weren't clear and try to understand them, but already we'll be done with the reason why we brought this. So here's the long braita. And not only is it a proof for Rav Papa, it's also a tiyuv to Rabbi Yoshaya, because as soon as you prove Rav Papa, you've basically disproven Rabbi Yoshaya. Shnei achim ba'olam echad. Okay, let's pull up our presentation. So we have two brothers. Okay, here we have Reuven and Shimon. Okay, there's Yaakov and Leah at the top, and then there's Reuven and Shimon underneath. And then Reuven's married to Yael, and Shimon's married to Shula. Meit echad mehem below Vlad. So now Reuven dies. Here's a strange thing. Shimon, you see, we made like a little bubble here. Shimon is planning to do ma'amar to Yael. He hasn't yet, but he's planning on it. Okay, before he manages to do ma'amar, what happens? Okay, then Levi's born. And then Shimon does. So he hasn't done ma'amar. He wanted to do ma'amar with Yael, but he didn't. Okay, and Shimon does. Harishona yotza mishum eshet achiv shelo haya ba'olamo. So Yael is prohibited because, right, she can't do yibum with Levi because she never did ma'amar with Shimon. Okay, he wanted to, but she didn't, right? This is Tanakama. So she's going to be forever forbidden to Levi. And the shniya o choletzet o mityabemet. Shula is permitted to Levi, right? She could do chalitza or yibum, whatever she prefers, because she's not a tzara of Yael, because Yael never married Shimon. Okay, that's the first thing we're going to see in this Mishnah. Next, asaba ma'amal. Let's say, okay, here I didn't bother bringing this because this is more obvious. Let's say he does ma'amal. Okay, he was thinking about doing it, but this time he really did it. And then after he did ma'amar, so he didn't marry her yet, but he did this ma'amal. But so it's on a rabbinic level, they're kind of married, right? Because ma'amar has validity on a rabbinic level, but on a Torah level, they're not married at all, because only if they do yibum. So, which is through having relations. So if he does ma'amar and then the brother's born, or the ma'amar is done after the brother's born, umeit, and he dies. Still, according to Tanakama, it doesn't make a difference. No matter what, she's forbidden for the rest of her life to this brother lady, so she's exempt. And the second one is in a bit of a bind, because maybe the ma'amar was valid on a rabbinic level, and then if the first wife is erva, then the tzara, shula, should be exempt. On the other hand, If it's not, and she's still connected to Reuven, then right on a Torah level, there's no yibum happened, then she's going to actually need to do yibum. So that's why she does chalitza, and she doesn't marry him because if it's really an erva problem, she can't marry him. Rabbi Shimon Omer, here comes Rabbi Shimon. Biata o chalitzata shelachat mehem poteret sarata. The bi'ah or chalitza of one of them, now it sounds like any one of them, but we're going to see in a second it's not. If the second wife, Shula, the tzara, or she's not exactly a tzara, but potential tzara, does yibum, she exempts the other one. But chalatz the ba'alat ma'amar, but if the one who did ma'amar, that's because the first one, right, maybe is obligated, but if the second one does it, she's for sure obligated in yibum because her husband Shimon died. It's the one that we're not sure is the brother erva to her or not that we don't know about. So if the second one does it, well, then the first one's for sure exempt, either because Shula did it for her because she's connected to Shimon, and then she's obligated in yibum, but her other wife did it, so it's fine. Or she's connected to Reuven, in which case she's not allowed to marry Levi, in which case she's exempt. So if the second wife, Shula, did, right, Shimon's wife, did chalitza or yibum, she exempts the other one. But chalatz the ba'alat ma'amal, and again, this is only Rabbi Shimon. Only Rabbi Shimon thinks that there's a potential that the woman could be obligated, right? That she could marry Levi. Chalatz the ba'alat ma'amal. But if the one who did ma'amal did chalitza, okay, meaning the first wife, if she was to do chalitza, lo nifterat tzara, she can't exempt the tzara because maybe she's not actually obligated in yibum for Shimon. She might be obligated from Reuven, and then even she can't even do it anyway, right? But she did chalitza just to be on the safe side, but she can't necessarily exempt Shimon's wife because that's a whole different bayit. Remember, there's Reuven's house and there's Shimon's house. We don't know which one she belongs to, but if she belongs to Reuven, she can't help Shimon's wife. Knasa, now we have a line that's unattributed that eventually the Gemara is going to say we must attribute this to Shimon, and that's going to prove our point because we haven't proven our point yet. We haven't gotten to the whole issue with the order. Knasa vamet, if he marries her and then dies, okay, meaning if Shimon marries her and then Shimon dies, va'achar kach nolad lo'ach. This is the case we haven't discussed at all. If after Shimon's death the brother is born, of course that's the eshet achiv shelo haya b'olamot because he died before Shimon. He wasn't even born when Shimon died. Oh, shenolad lo ach v'achar kach k'nasav v'met, or the brother was born in between Reuven's death and Shimon's death. That's exactly the case that we're wondering what Rabbi Shimon holds. Shtehem p'turot min ha'chalitza u'min ha'yibum. Okay, in that case, we're going to say it's erva. It's eshet achiv shelo ba'al olamo. She can't marry him, in which case she's exempt and her tzara is exempt. That's in a case where she eventually marries Shimon, but the son is born before she does yibum with Shimon. So now, if we attribute this to Rabbi Shimon, which is what we're going to prove in a minute, then it's clear that Rabbi Shimon doesn't disagree with the rabbis in the first mishna. Okay, and then we have our answer. Now we get another case. K'nasav v'nolad lo ach. He marries her. Shimon does yibum, and then the baby's born, right? The Levi's son, the Levi brother. V'achar kach met, and then Shimon dies. Shtehem p'turot min ha'chalitza u'min ha'yibum. This is Tanakama's opinion. And here it comes in the name of Divrei Rabbi Meir. Okay, that basically they're going to be exempt because it doesn't matter that she was already married to Shimon when Levi was born. She's still, compared to her first husband, Reuven, this is, right, she's eshet achiv shelo haya b'olamo. Rabbi Shimon Omer, ho'ilu ba'u mitza'ah behetil, since when Levi was born, she was married to his brother, and then it ended up when her brother died, Levi was around. Well, she was never forbidden to him from Shimon's perspective, and she was married to Shimon at this point. So if Shimon were to die, and both were married to Shimon at the time Levi was born, for sure, either one of them could do yibum or chalitza. So now they go back to this habava de seifa leman katana. This line that I said is unattributed. Who does it attribute to? Who is it attributed? If you want to say it's attributed to Rabbi Meir, well, if he doesn't make it doesn't matter to him what the order is, well, then those all should have been listed as one long case. So it must be Rabbi Shimon. There, you can prove it. Now we're going to get off on tangents to try to understand other parts of the mission. Amar. This is that weird case where he thought to do mamar, but he didn't. And then it said, Rishona, she's still connected to Reuben because he never did ma'amar. And the next one does whatever she wants. She could do chalitza or yibum. My amadu, my lo speak. Why does it matter if he wanted to do it and then didn't manage to? Avad, avad, ilo avad, lo avad. It all matters of whether he did it or he didn't do it. What his thoughts were is irrelevant. Ela must be amar midata velo speak midata elabal kocha. He wanted to do it with her. She was going to agree to it. But then she changed her mind. And then he only managed to do yibum to her against her will. And then we say, oh, that yibum doesn't count at all because you can't do yibum against her will. Well, we saw there was a machloket about this. We saw by Torah law, yes, but the rabbis came and disagreed and said, no, you have to do ma'amal and ma'amar has to be with her will. So, sorry, he didn't do yibum against her will, my mistake. He did ma'amar against her will. So now they say udelo kerebi. This was coming to tell you we don't hold like Rebbe. There's a machloket about this. We talked about this when we talked about yibum against her will. Here we see the machloket inside. Rebbe Omer Kana. Okay, sorry, Ditanya, as it says in the braita, if you do ma'amar and yivama without her consent, Rebbe Omer Koneh, he thinks it actually is valid. We'll see in a minute why. We hold like the rabbis. That's why when I talked about this last time, I brought you the psak halacha that we don't has to be willing. My time of Rebbe, Gamar bi'ad yivama, ma bi'ad yivama ba'al korcha, af kiddushin yivama ba'al korcha. Just like the Yevamot yavo aleha, he could do it without her consent. Therefore, the ma'amar is also without her consent. Rabbanan, gamar kiddushin da'alma. What do you mean? Ma'amar is like kiddushin, and ma kiddushin da'alma midata. Just like the betrothal has to be with her will, af kiddushin diyavama midata. What's the real root of the machloket? Anything that has to do with yibum, we're going to learn from yibum issues. That's Rebbe. But marsavar mila de kiddushin, mila de kiddushin. No, this is a betrothal issue. We're going to learn it from other issues of betrothal. Asaba ma'amar v'nolad lo ach. Oshenolad lo ach v'chach kachasaba ma'amar. Another quote from the braita. So first he does ma'amar, then the brother's born, or the brother's born and then they do ma'amar v'met. Rishona yotzei mishumesh lachiv shalo ba'ala olam. Right, the first one's exempt. Shniach cholesef v'lo mityabemet, and then comes Rabbi Shimon and says, Rabbi Shimon omer biyatau chalitzata shlecha behem poteret sakata. Right? If one of them does it, it exempts the other. Rabbi Shimon Hayakai, which line is he referring to? Right, the brother was born and then he did yibum. Sorry, then he did ma'amal. Rabbi Shimon. We said he doesn't disagree in that case. It can't be referring to that one. So it must be, which was actually the case that appeared right before Rabbi Shimon. It must be the previous case. It must be, it's referring to Ella Asaba Ma'amal. It must be if he did ma'amal and then the brother's born. What he's trying to say is the ma'amar is as if they did yibum already. And therefore, then we're going to get into the situation where it's kind of in between, where we consider her much more married to Shimon than before. And therefore, we're going to do this in between where the other one can do yibum and right biyatav, chalitzatav, the other one will exempt her. Chalatz ba'alat ma'amar lo niftarat tzara, my time mishum dehavet tzarat vadai uba'alat ma'amar safek ve'en safek motzi midei vadai. We have one who's a doubtful case and one who's a for sure case. Since the tzara for sure needs yibum because she's married to Shimon and Shimon's the one who died, she does the chalitza and that exempts the other one. But don't use someone that we're not sure if she's the one who Shimon is married to or not, right? We don't know if she belongs to Reuben or Shimon. Can't use her to exempt the other, Shimon's other wife. Okay, last thing for today. Yativ Rav Menashe bar Zvi kamed Rav Huna v'yativ v'kamar my tamed Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara says, what do you mean my tamed Rabbi Shimon? What do you mean? What's his reason? We already know. Kedamar tama ho ilu mitzah behetil v'lo amda'alav sha'achat yisur. We already just said that. Since when he was born, she was married to Shimon. So as relates to Shimon, he's not an Esh Lachiv. She's not an Esh Lachiv shaloya ba'olam. Ela my tamed Chavana. What they really want to know is what's the reason for Rabbanit. Notice the order. He takes her for a wife, and then it says, and he does yibum. To which they say, you see that even after he takes her for a wife, she's still considered a yivama. She's always kind of considered connected to Reuven. So therefore, that brother will forever be forbidden to her because she's still connected somehow to her first husband, which is an interesting perspective about what happens when she does yibum. The Gemara is going to ask in a minute, but didn't we say once she marries Shimon, she's like his wife for all intents and purposes? So isn't that mean she's kind of disconnected with Reuven? So we'll get to the answer for this in tomorrow's in class on Sunday. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov.